Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone to the Irish Stammering Association's speaker series. We are very happy to have Mary O'Dwyer and James McCormack just for this speaker series. So I would just like to do just a couple of short bios on Mary and James, and then we can just get in. So, Mary O'Dwyer has a special interest in working and learning from people who stutter. She works in Cork Kerry Community Healthcare, and the publications that she has been involved with have been building resilience in children through Camp Dream Speak Live. She has done this in conjunction with Courtney Board. She has also done narrative practice in stuttering therapy, and she did this in conjunction with Fiona Ryan. Mary has also presented posters at the Oxford Disfluency Conference, and the poster that she did was Stuttering, What Has Love Got to Do With It? And James, our other speaker, is an accredited counsellor, psychotherapist, and clinical supervisor. He experienced his own mental health concerns during adolescence and is a person who stammers. James believes that these experiences have given him insight and empathy and a belief that people can change, move forward, and create a dynamic and satisfying life despite the challenges that they may face. James was formerly head of the Student Counselling and Wellbeing at University of Galway, but is now working in private practice. In the past, he has supported speech and language therapists with individual and group work with young people and adults who stammer. James loves the outdoors and sea swimming and water-based activities are his go-to to play and unwind. So I would just like everyone to give Mary and James just a warm welcome. I will pass you over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that lovely introduction and welcome. I'm going to just share the PowerPoint here. What I am not sure about doing in this is, are you seeing a PowerPoint now?
No. So
I thought I had shared. Hang on, let me just see. Okay, James may end up having to be the one to share. I'm not on my own laptop, so I'm not sure. I thought I am sharing, but it's telling me that I'm not sharing. I know, no, James, I know what's wrong. I'm just not doing this right. Sorry. I thought I had done something else. I'm not used to using Zoom as much as, okay, so now you can see it.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm not sure is how to make it run as a slideshow within this. It's now running as a slideshow, yeah?
Yeah, it is now as a slideshow, Mary. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we have quite a big title to deal with, as you can see. So we really struggled when we were getting everything ready with trying to pack everything in, and I hope we don't talk too much, but that's both of our hopes, is that it will be interactive and that you will get a chance to interact with what we're talking about. So we're going to start with very quick introductions of ourselves. So just our own stories. So for me, I've worked as a speech and language therapist and worked with people who stutter for over 40 years. In that time, things have changed and things haven't changed. It's interesting. I've changed, of course, at least I hope I have. So when I started out working in this area, the idea of, therapists as allies was certainly not spoken about. We were much more seen as fixers, and that can still be the case, even though we may not see ourselves in a fixing role. But that has changed for me very much. I think about a few hours or a few years after starting working, I realized that I needed to give Mrs. Fix-It, as I kind of caricatured that side of myself as, her P45. And I think from then on, I really just started listening to people who stutter and learning from people who stutter. And lots of times I heard stories about how they had found therapy unhelpful or even negative. That's me. I'm going to hand you over now to James to tell you a little bit about his story, and then I'll come back again. So James.
I'll mute myself here. I just need to get some little prompt notes on the go here for myself. Yeah. So just I stammered, right back as long as I can remember as a child. My early memory of stammering was just in the form of numerous repetitions. I knew there was something different about my speech and worthy of negative attention. Due to look of distress of some and the well-meaning but unhelpful suggestions of others, which I'm sure anyone who stammers understands. Slow down, take your time, start over, all those kinds of things. Unfortunately, the only explicit conversation that I had about stammering was when a small number of children and sometimes adults would think that my stammering was worthy of ridicule or mockery, or a vulnerability to be exploited. And even though my father stammered, several of my uncles, my mum used to talk about one of my uncles who had a dreadful stammer. A dreadful stammer is a stammer that you'd have to lock it in a room, and every so often open the door and get a whip in it. It was so dreadful. Anyway, but I suppose I got persuaded that I was a weirdo and I needed to be a fluent speaker. That was a really strong kind of injunction for me. And anybody that stammers, would probably understand that. But the more I tried to be a fluent speaker, the more I stammered. In the first few days of secondary school, the situation that we all hate, asked to stand up, say your name, and start reading. It was just at that time, I was 12, that my stammering turned into really very difficult blocks, which I hadn't really experienced before. And then I could hear a mixture of kind of nervous shuffling and occasional giggling around me, which, of course, made things worse. So back in the 70s, I'm telling my age now, there was very little known about stammering in Ireland. So I went to speech therapy for a short while, but it wasn't really helpful at all. In fact, it was the opposite, as Mary had mentioned. I experienced quite a lot of mimicking and bullying in secondary school. And again, that pressure to stammer, to not stammer, to try and speak fluently, which is counterproductive. And then when you think about the kind of the unconscious messages that we get, no one spoke to me about it, but everybody in the school, every single year, there was 365 boys, and it was in a boarding school. They all had to audition for the school play every year. Every year, didn't matter, without exception. I auditioned once. I was not asked after that, but nobody sat down and talked to me about it. So I also learned that stammering was something not to talk about. So maybe due to the expectation of others, because there was really high expectations put on me because of family background and so on. Maybe because of the stammer, I experienced a severe depressive episode in my final year of school. Now, just to say, this is a sad story, but it's got a happy ending. So you needn't feel too sad for me. But thanks for your empathy. So I dropped out of college twice. People say to me, "What did you do after you did the leaving?" Well, I say, "Well, I lived in Galway when my parents thought I was going to university." And the next question is, "Well, what did you take in university?" Well, I took drugs. I know it's funny, but actually it's not very funny. But like most people who stammer, my stammer ebbed and flowed during those times. finally, I met some people that were very supportive. I got a, you know, interviews were very difficult for me because usually I only got as far as, can you say your name? And that's as far as I got, because I found my name nigh impossible to say. But, you know, I met some people, like I said, very supportive people. I got a job initially on the building site. And then I started my own small cleaning company. I got, you know, got married, had children. Now I've got 2 amazing grandchildren. So I'm very happy with my life, very proud of who I am. But at that time, I suppose I had developed loads of, you know, what we call secondary behaviors to try and hide the stammer. So for me, that was saying loads of and restarting, avoiding eye contact, coughing, using like, just, you know what I mean, like filler words, all the things that many of you will be familiar with. As a young adult, I tried a couple of different approaches to treatment of stammering, including Shames and Florence. You know, it's like a continuous phonation, very similar to the Camperdown program, where I learned, you know, so I learned a novel way of speaking, which helped for a little while, maybe when I was doing presentations and so on, because I was in a work study program at that time. But the stammer was always lurking in the background, and it re-emerged. When I was approaching 50, I decided I was changing from, you know, I was getting out of the cleaning contracting, and I was training as a psychotherapist. So for my 50th birthday, I heard about the Free to Stutter, Free to Speak program that Mary and Fiona were running down in HSE South. So I decided I'd give myself a 50th birthday present of going to that week-long intensive program. And that was a game changer for me, which I'll talk about later. So, you know, as Stephen has said, I, you know, trained as a psychotherapist, and I retired from the head of counselling in the university. So Mary, that's a very long-winded introduction. Do you want to take over from here again?
I will. I'll go back again. Yeah. Now. So thanks, James. So I just don't seem to be able to get this slide to move on. Why is that? Hang on a second. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stammer affirming therapy, and you might wonder, why have I put vulnerability just to head right under it? I think for me, it's because while stammer affirming therapy sounds like it's affirming, so therefore it should be positive, and it is positive, I think that for lots of people, it involves a level of vulnerability that can be difficult to move into unless you're in the right time and at the right place. So it's becoming easier, I think. Certainly I would find that with people that come to therapy now. And when I talk about people, I'm also talking about parents, because quite often I'm working with children, and parents bring their children to therapy. And of course, when people come to therapy, including adults, even very recently, I had a lovely message from a man who said that after a few sessions of group, that he wouldn't be coming back because there was no cure. There was really no, and that's what he was looking for. He could come to 100 groups and it wouldn't make any difference to him, so he wouldn't be coming to any more meetings. And that's fair enough. I did try and maybe persuade him a little bit about the benefits of stammer affirming therapy, but for him, that's not what he wanted. He was looking for the cure, or a cure. So I think we'll come and talk about this in future slides, and James will talk about it in terms of his own story. But openness is a big part for me. It's a cornerstone of stammer affirming therapy, being open on a number of different levels. And whenever we're open, I think it involves being vulnerable. And that's a positive. Chris Constantino, I'm sure some of you are familiar with him. He defines stammer affirming therapy as follows: that it focuses on conditioning the speaker's reaction to stuttering in ways that move forward and embrace stuttering, which he calls stutterphilic, rather than, sorry, did I move your slide by mistake? I was trying to move you out of the way, and now I don't know how to go back. Sorry, just bear with me for a second till I find the one that says previous slide, which I can't find because I have too many controls up here. Okay, so Apologies about this now. I'll just go back to it. There we go. So stutterphilic reactions rather than in ways that move away from and reject stuttering, which Chris Constantino calls stutterphobic reactions. So I think that is really the core of stammering affirming therapy. And I think you can see then how vulnerability becomes involved, because if you've grown up or if you come to therapy with the idea that this is something you want to get rid of, something you don't like, something that's bad, something that's shameful, something that's a problem, something that annoys you, drives you crazy, is stopping you from making progress. When a therapist comes and talks about, well, maybe we can look at moving forward and embracing it rather than away from and rejecting it, it does involve a level of placing a trust in a process. So for me, again, another cornerstone of stammer affirming therapy is that it's okay to stammer. And in fact, it's about being proud of stammering. And this is different to acceptance. I think the word acceptance can sort of, again, sort of chimes with that idea of like just tolerating it, which Van Riper did talk about. I'm not going to get into all the theory, but you know, the idea that of tolerating stammering, and that's for some people as far as it kind of goes. But for other people nowadays, more and more people talk about being proud of stammering and celebrating stammering. And I think that's really joyful. And it's just very much affirming. That is kind of the pinnacle of affirming. Some of the key kind of concepts as a therapist within stammer affirming therapy and for people who are coming to therapy is the idea of open stuttering and also voluntary stuttering. And they are different. Open stuttering, in my experience, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, is probably what people find much more challenging than voluntary stuttering, although that can be challenging for some people too. And for me, a really key component of stammer affirming therapy is groups. I think there's nothing more affirming than being in a group with other people who stammer. So yes, as James said, Fiona and I began a program. Was it 2009, James, when you were 50? It was the first year. So anyway, around then. Yeah, Free to Stutter, Free to Speak was the name. So as you can tell from the name, it was about being free to stutter and speak and not about fluency at all. And at one stage, after running it for a while, we asked people who had attended it to rate the different components. And the ones that were most popular were the mindfulness component of the program and also the open discussion about stuttering. So again, the openness bit, having a place just to openly talk about stuttering is a part of stammer affirming therapy. You know, I keep changing between stuttering and stammering because that's what I'm used to doing. I hope that's okay with you. And then the next two most popular components were voluntary stuttering and group support. So again, the whole idea of community, which we're kind of referencing today, is a really key part of stammering affirming therapy. And that community is diverse. So within it, there are some people who hate voluntary stuttering and really do not like when we get there, but there are some people who really enjoy doing voluntary stuttering and see it as a huge part of their journey towards being proud of stammering, accepting stammering, becoming desensitized to stuttering, whatever language you want to use. And then the next two were avoidance reduction and open stuttering. So 7 out of 12 people that replied to this questionnaire that we did said open stuttering was one of an important component for them. So that's just about over 50%. So yeah, I think open stuttering people can find more challenging than voluntary stuttering. Again, I think that links back to the notion of vulnerability, just letting your stutter out, not doing what you've been doing for years is challenging and involves a lot of vulnerability. Another key component of stammering affirming therapy for us is narratives, which links with identity. So we use narrative practice or narrative therapy as a key component of our therapy program. And also just interested in letting people tell their stories without even using the techniques or components of narrative practice. And I think that's the open discussion about stuttering and the group support, that's often just done in a very unstructured but structured round where people are just have a chance to talk about their experience. And the whole time, of course, the focus is on building awareness. In stammer affirming therapy, there's often a particular focus on what you're doing in the moment of stuttering, physically and physiologically, but also we would be working on awareness around cognitions, around thoughts and around emotions. More recently, I have become, we're running in Tralee Camp Dream Speak Live, and this comes from Courtney Bird in Austin, Texas, who has developed a model of practice called CARE. And the key components of that are communication, advocacy, resiliency, and education. I'm not going to go into it just because in the interest of time. Another really long-standing pillar of stammer affirming therapy comes from Joseph Sheehan, and more recently Vivian Siskin, which is arts or avoidance reduction and avoidance reduction therapy. Again, open stuttering is a huge part of avoidance reduction therapy, and voluntary stuttering is involved as well. Stuttering modification therapy differs slightly. It was more maybe the work of Van Riper. Van Riper and Sheehan were peers. Stuttering modification, and some people will go into great detail telling you the difference between the two approaches, but in many ways they share a lot of common factors. And a big part in all of this is that you can be doing the same work. You can be working on modifying stammering, or you can be working on openness. But sometimes the key bit is what's your intention when you're doing it. So is your intention to try and avoid stuttering? Is your intention to smooth it out so that you'll sound more normal? Or, what's your intention when you're doing it? Because that often is, will define how affirming or how stammer affirming it is. And there's no right or wrong. Everybody's on a journey. And that's one of the things I've really learned, is everybody's journey is individual. And people make that journey with the support of others, but it's very much their own journey. And we will focus on this, I know, and James will focus on it a lot. So really, the cornerstone is building awareness. So because then people have choice. When they're aware of what their intention is, they have choice about staying with that or changing it as and when they wish. And it's not a forever. A decision made today could be a different one next week or next month or next year. So I am then going to say where I think I am in my journey and where I find more and more people I work with, including parents, and I'm really delighted to say that, is celebration. The whole idea that stammering is something to be celebrated, that it is another way of speaking, and it offers huge opportunities to the world and to society. It's an invitation to slow down and listen to one another. It's an invitation to challenge some of the time constraints and restrictions that we place on one another. I've been involved in a few projects that really have brought me to this place. One of them is the Stammering Collective, which you can Google. There were clinical, creative and cultural strands involved in it, and I really can't go into it any more than that. But I do want to focus a little bit more on Stuttering Commons, which came out of the Stammering Collective. Some people from that, like Sam Simpson, and Sam Simpson, who else? Joshua St. Pierre, Chris Constantino, Connor Foran from Ireland are all part of the Stuttering Commons group, and they are doing amazing work. They got some funding, and they've developed different. One of the things they've developed is a new way of assessing, a new assessment for people who stammer, which you can do as an app. It's not quite launched on that website yet, but yeah, have a look at it. It really is, for me, the most exciting thing that's going on at the moment in the whole stuttering world. So their manifesto is, we welcome stuttering in all its forms, frequencies and intersections, recognizing that we all stutter and stammer in different ways. Collectively, we desire space and time for people with disfluencies and their allies to explore, celebrate, study and document vocal disfluencies. I think I better move on. I'd say James is wondering if there won't be any time left for him. I'm nearly there. And linked with this is the whole idea of resisting ableism, which I find more and more is how I might define some of the work I do as a therapist, as a manager, as a supervisor. And it's very rewarding. So it's supporting people to just question. In narrative therapy, we might talk about, deconstructing the dominant or normalizing discourse that's out in society about what it takes to be a good communicator. And I have experiences where parents have just been really moved when they realize that they don't have to judge their child for stuttering. And when they will say things like, my God, like I can actually celebrate them for who they are and how special they are and how this is who they, this is how they speak, and see their strengths, and not be kind of just focused on, oh, this is a problem that we must fix because it's going to stop them from getting on with their life. So again, we're back to stammering. Pride and openness is a key part of that. And so there's a real non-judgmentalness. If parents are going to change, we have to be really open to supporting them, because it is very challenging for parents when their child begins to stutter, particularly if they haven't much experience of stuttering. Another key kind of word in this whole area is the idea of fluency, privilege. And people don't often think about that, about the fact that society is set up to privilege fluency, and that we want to get to a place where everybody can say their name in whatever way they say it, without any risk or fear of being laughed at or looked at quizzically or, negatively responded to. And a concept that Joshua St. Pierre talks about, and again, I'm not going to go into the alternative ways of belonging, but it's the idea of transformative belonging, which is the possibilities of collectively altering. That's all of us, whether we stammer or not. When, why, where, and how, and what it means to belong in this world. So again, I talked earlier on about acceptance. So this is more than just accepting stuttering and being accepted kind of because, yeah, sure, look, you're different, but it's all right, you still belong. Transformative belonging is different. It's just about belonging in that we all work out what is belonging about, and everybody belongs and in the same way or in their own unique ways, whichever way you want to look at it. So I'm going to stop there and throw it open to you. And we're going to kind of use questions from narrative practice to kind of, you don't have to stick with these. You can say anything you want. You can ask any question you want. But for a minute, we wanted to ask you to reflect on these questions. What most captured your imagination about what we've spoken about so far? And what does it have you thinking or feeling? What mental image does it bring up for you, if any? So maybe if you want to take a moment now, and we'll just allow a few minutes for people to interact with us on what we've said so far. And again, you do not have to stick with these questions. You can, any comment you want to make or any other question you want to ask is also welcome. I'm just going to come out of the stammer show for the minute, maybe, and no, I won't actually. Or will I? I have minimized you, so take it away, anybody. And I'm just going to maximize my screen again where I can see participants. Okay. Anybody got any questions or comments or things they want to say?
Mary, I just want to say that I love the way that you used the word celebration, because now, and I even know that even on the stuff I do on social media, that I do talk about acceptance loads, but I also talk about the celebration of kind of stammering, stuttering, and just of like what we gain by in embracing the identity. So yeah, I just thought it was actually great that you kind of used that terminology, like the fact that we can kind of celebrate.
And when you think about celebrating stammering, is there any kind of image that comes to mind, Stephen? When you think about that?
Oh, well, I suppose the image that comes to mind is that you can kind of see somebody in a stammering moment, but it isn't like it can also be kind of joyful, like, you know, that like you can see that the person is in, you can see by the rest of their face then actually that they're not worried, or like they are just in that moment. Because and I think Sheen and Van Riper would have talked about just finding peace in that moment of stammering. Also, you actually know, because like I do like to say just on my own journey that like stammering can be ever present, but really not at the forefront of my mind as well. So like it is there, and I'm actually quite happy that it is there.
Thank you. Yeah. And you know, that's one of the things, like Sheehan and Van Riper did say this a lot, like said lots of things that support where we are now. And that's what I mean when I say things have changed a lot. And at the same time, some of the seeds were always there, I think. And just now they're really blooming. And we have time for one more comment or question if anybody wants before I hand it back to James. No?
Just if I could, just to the thing that appealed to me most or captured my imagination most was the focus on openness, you know, and trying to get away from the covert side, or and it ties in with you know, there has been, or probably still is, quite a sense of shame around it, and you've used the words stammering pride, right? And it's not, and it's a phrase you hear a lot in terms of various groups and advocacy groups and self-supporting groups and all that. You know, you put pride at the end of you know, a name or a slogan or that. But in terms of stammering pride, I don't get the concept of pride in my stammer. You know, if I hadn't got 10 fingers, if I only had 2 fingers, I might feel shame about that. But if I've 10 fingers, I just don't feel anything about it. You know, I don't feel pride, you know, or you know, so in terms of stammering pride and someone who stammers, you know, I'm not at a place yet where I understand what you mean by pride in it.
I think I understand where so is what you're saying, Vince, that because stammering is another way of speaking, and that's all it is. It's like it's a way of speaking. It's not another way, it's just a way of speaking. That there's no need to be pride. It's like having 10 fingers. Is that what you mean?
No, what I'm saying is because I stammer, I don't see a reason to be proud of stammering, right? You know, if I didn't stammer, I don't think I'd be proud of that. You know, but I suppose, you know, stammering is a different way of speaking. It is something that only represents the person's speech and nothing else, you know. So but certainly from my own point of view, I prefer not to stammer, and I know that's not everybody's view, and that's fine. That's fine. But my view is I would prefer not to stammer. Now I have accepted it, and I work with it, but I don't get that move to being proud of having it, as if I should be persuading someone who doesn't stammer, as if I should be persuading them to start stammering. You know,
I understand. So, yeah, I do understand, and I think I understand hugely, actually, and I do think it's there's I hope don't mind me saying there's a generational thing. Sometimes I find that with the kids we work with and younger parents, they very quickly move towards not having any, like there's hardly any shame often to begin with. It's maybe more a problem focus. I think just, you know, society and normalizing, what we call normalizing discourses are changing. So the idea of what's normal and what's not normal has shifted a lot, I think, in the last even 10 years. And so I think that concept of celebrating difference and being proud of difference is more available to maybe younger people. And I'm not saying that it's a better way. And I think it is about diversity within the community. There are people for whom the pursuit of fluency is how they wish to pursue, to travel their journey. And for other people, it's the pursuit of just easier stuttering without tension. But I think James addresses the very issues you talked about. So I'm going to hand over to James now, because I know James deals with these. And thanks for that, Vince.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back and run as a slideshow for you, James. Thanks everybody. Okay, James, you're on.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really, yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, that's really interesting conversation. And yeah, so I'll rather than comment on the comments, maybe I just continue with what I would like to say, because I've got loads to say about all of this. So I think let's blow to pieces the premise or the idea that there's something wrong with people who stammer, and it's like, it's like Vincent is saying, like we don't want to stammer, no, we do, and that's just a fact of life, but we didn't go in and buy it in a shop and stammer just for the crack. It's not a choice. And millions of euro research later, we can't still define exactly why around 1% of the population stammer. But one thing we do know is that when we try to not stammer, it greatly increases the likelihood of stammering and instances of stammering, as well as the anxiety, fear, and shame we feel about it. The exception to that, of course, is if somebody's doing some kind of form of therapy where they're consciously trying to do something new, or maybe perhaps it's fluency shaping therapy, and that isn't really what we're talking about here. I think when I did the Free to Stutter, Free to Speak program in 2009, I began to consider that perhaps there's actually nothing wrong with me. I'm simply one of the 1%. It's a paradox. There was a psychiatrist, Arnold Beisler, talks about, and I think in that program, I started to allow myself to be what I am, which is a person that stammers. And Beisler talks about change happens when I become what I am, not when I try to become something that I'm not. So at least initially, I need to become what I am, and then I need to understand what it is that's going on for me in my body, emotions, thoughts, and so on. Then you see, if I can't work out, understand what's happening for me, how can I possibly know what I might need to do about it? I suppose, just to get back to my own story a little bit, like, why would a small child, I stammered, like I said, loads of repetitions, but then when I was ridiculed or mimicked, or, somebody brought other attention to it, trying to be helpful, I tried not to stammer. And of course, that only made it worse. When I got a bit older, I checked inside my own head. There wasn't anybody else in there, or so I thought. So the only person I could blame was myself. But I realized actually that wasn't fair, because there were actually thoughts and ideas about stammering in my head that didn't come from me. So what we experience is, we're going to talk about stigma, but what I experienced as a child, as an adult who stammered, was an unconscious bias. So this is a stigmatizing idea that's been introduced into society that becomes the norm, even though there's no evidence base for it. And a lot of times it isn't even spoken about. Researchers would call this, discourse or folklore. And the discourse for people who stammer is, you have to look, behave, and speak normally, like the rest of us. Anything else is not acceptable. Now, the same can be said for any other challenge that people might face. Could be visual impairment and so on, neurodiversity. So the driver behind behind the idea that someone who stammers has something wrong with them is stigma. So and I, when I think about it, I checked out my own head. I couldn't find anybody else in there. However, the way that stigma works, those normalized ideas are insidious and sneaky, and they just get ingrained in us. And we see that there's loads of other examples of that in our society, unfortunately. But it's usually an unconscious process, both for the listener and for the person who stammers. This idea that people who stammer can't be teachers. They definitely shouldn't be speech and language therapists. They can't work at a reception. They shouldn't be telephonists, and so on. But that's usually an unconscious thing. So just to give you a definition of stigma from Queen's University, so I'm going to quote, the expectations of a stigmatizer. This is somebody who maybe unwittingly is stigmatizing or putting those negative ideas about stammering at somebody. Expectations of the stigmatizer can become self-fulfilling prophecies for the stigmatized individual, who may internalize negative stereotypes and act in ways that reinforce those expectations. This occurs as the stigmatized person anticipates discrimination, experiences a reduction in self-efficacy, and changes their behavior to align with the perceived negative social status associated with their mark or condition, end of quote. And again, this process is usually unconscious for both listener and for the person that stammers, but can have severe consequences nonetheless. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, it's a gross disrespect of the person who stammers or who's experiencing some other kind of a challenge that isn't construed as the norm. Maybe, and just to say that therapy that promotes fluency could be construed to be aligning with, a stigmatizing discourse about, now you have to be fluent. But I think it's more complex than that. So promoting fluency isn't necessarily a negative thing, depending on your approach to therapy. But to be effective, I believe it must be in a context, and we need to be open to many perspectives, that each individual person who stammers finds helpful. So there's no one size fits all here. So in recent years, in neurodiverse circles, we talk about masking, which Mary has mentioned. And people who stammer experience the same phenomena. And due to the shame introduced by the stigma of stammering, many people who stammer have felt a need to train themselves over time to engage in loads of secondary behaviors. I know Vincent alluded to this as well, and Stephen, to hide or mask the fact that they stammer. So, one of the main tasks then is to, is to overcome or push back against the shame introduced by the stigma. I used to think for years that I was the villain, that it was my fault. Actually, it's not my fault. And who is the villain? Well, it's not you, and it's not me. It's stigma is the villain. And for some people, achieving the goal of just overcoming or pushing back against the shame of stammering and starting to be okay about stammering. So I stammer. Sometimes it's a nuisance. It makes it difficult to communicate sometimes, but I'm okay about it, and that's enough for me, and that's fine. And I really, respect and accept people that that's their own personal, perspective on it. But for some people, then we might want to go, I won't say a step further, because it's just, we want to also see, is there some way that we can make our speech easier? And that's the camp that I'm very firmly in. I suppose the thing about secondary behaviors, there isn't anything that we want to do with secondary behaviors. Like for me, I used to use a lot of, and I still can if I get stuck. There's a group of people that I swim with, and sometimes if the conversation is going around the group very quickly and joking and stuff like that, I can't come in, or I feel under pressure to say what I have to say, and there might be those, and my face might grimace. All of those things still happen for me, but I don't feel ashamed about it, and I don't beat myself up over it anymore. But with secondary behaviors, I think the work with them is to reduce them if possible, or to eliminate them altogether, because there's nothing really that we can do with those. So what I'm thinking and talking about now is, how can I make my speech easier? How can I stammer more easily? So I think, I think a little bit about reverse engineering. So I developed all these secondary behaviors, all the oohs, the arms, the slapping my thigh, the avoiding eye contact, all of those kinds of things. So I need to start stripping those away and getting back to what my stammer would sound like if I wasn't influenced by stigma, if I didn't feel ashamed or embarrassed, if I just could accept I am one of the 1%. It's not my fault. This is just how I speak. There's nothing wrong with me. If I could strip back away all those secondary behaviors and get back to the pure stammering, what would it sound like? Because I can think we can do something with that. That's my experience. Just to give you an example, and think about how insidious and sneaky stigma is. First of all, it persuades the person who stammers that there's something wrong with them, that they need to be fluent. It's not acceptable, and it also brainwashes both the person that stammers and their parents sometimes. Give you a quick example of that. Patricia Collins, who's a senior speech and language therapist in Galway, we used to do some groups with young people, and we were working with a group of teenagers. So we decided to turn therapy on its head, and we put the parents into the observation room so they could see and try and understand what we were doing with the young people in therapy, so that they might encourage them to continue with that, or it might encourage the parents to relax a little bit and allow the young people to do what they needed to do to manage to manage the fact that they stuttered. So there was one child that we were working with. I think he was about maybe a young teenager, and he was struggling. He was blocking really severely, trying to say something. And I stopped him for a moment, and I said, "Sorry, just stop you for a moment there. Can I ask you, in this moment, as you're blocking, what are you trying to do?" He said, "I'm trying to talk." And I said, "Absolutely. But the question is, there was a psychiatrist called George Kelly, or a psychologist, George Kelly, and used to ask the question, by doing what you're doing, what are you not doing? So by doing all the secondary behaviors, what are you not actually doing?" So that was the question I had for this young person. And I said, if you weren't blocking, what would your stammering sound like? And he said, loads of repetitions. And I said, what would it be like to try and say what you're saying, but allow yourself to say as many of the repetitions as you need? And it doesn't matter. We'll wait. We don't care. We'll wait for as long as it takes for you to let out all those repetitions. So he began to speak using loads of repetitions. And he looked visibly less distressed, and his speech was much easier. His breathing wasn't labored. And then we could hear all kinds of chairs moving in the observation room. And later we realized that the child's mother was in the room, was in the observation room, and she said, what's James doing? He's making my son's stammer worse. And then the other parents were more aware of what we were doing, and they helped the mum to calm down, and she listened and observed. And really, I suppose the point is, she believed that for her son to use loads of repetitions was worse for him than to try and stop them. So I suppose the brainwashing was complete. So it's about stepping back. So I suppose my thinking about this is, and in the Free to Stutter program was the same. So like a two-pronged approach. Number one, I do my best to learn to desensitize myself, and to, we use the word accept. It's really not a passive acceptance. It's an acknowledgement. Right, I'm one of the 1%. So what am I going to do with that? And then, is there some way that I can make my stammering easier? So what's important then is to be able to, and I think somebody maybe alluded to it earlier, how can I, maybe with Stephen, how can I catch myself? I'm not sure who, I've forgotten, maybe it was Mary who mentioned it. how can I catch myself in that moment of stammering, in that, you know, somebody once referred to it as the horrific moment of stammering, and stop and step back and work out what is actually going on for me in this moment. So we, you know, we talk about self-awareness. Now, we were thinking about doing a self-awareness exercise, which maybe we will do, because that's, I think, one of the things that's really helped me, and I suppose I've got my psychotherapy hat on me as well. One of the things that I found most helpful, and I think lots of other people who stammer, Mary mentioned mindfulness, is to use self-awareness in a very definite way, but particularly in that moment of stammering. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about Aikido just for a moment, and then maybe we'll do that exercise. So you know, you might know what Aikido is. Aikido is a martial art, and the idea is to study how your opponent moves, and then to use their energy along with your own against them. And I think we can use this Aikido principle when it comes to stigma. So we need to study how our opponent, we need to study how stigma moves and how they use their power to subdue us, so we can maybe begin to grab hold of their power and use it for ourselves. But this takes training and patience. There's no quick fix here, but it's about observing what's happening as I'm in that moment of stammering, observing in my body, emotions, thoughts, mental images, and impulses, what's happening for me in that moment of stammering. So it's almost like I'm stepping back and observing myself, almost as if I'm observing the body sensations, thoughts, mental images, impulses in somebody else. But really what I'm trying to do is not judge, just understand. So I could be really struggling, and I, you know, experience this for myself as well, and maybe other people who stammer have as well. So my body could be really struggling. I could have a pain in my chest because I'm blocking and stammering is so severe. And the eye who's observing is actually okay. I'm just standing back. Wow, isn't that interesting? Look what's happening for James now, isn't that? I wonder why is he? What's going on here? And then I'm just losing. Yeah. So the first step, I think, is to patiently go along with the stammer, not to fight against it. So I go along with it, and then you know, so then it's a bit like a three-legged race. So if I tie one of my legs on to somebody else and I try and move in a different way than they are, we're just going to fall over. So I just need to learn to relax and go along with the stammer initially, and then gradually I can start to exert my influence over what's going on in my as I'm speaking. And that's why things like, I think, voluntary stammering can be really useful. The other thing is that, you know, we can sit all day in therapy, we can read books, we can listen to podcasts, but really what we need to be able to do is resource ourselves in that moment of stammering to just switch on that self-awareness and work out what it is that's happening for us. Because like I said earlier, if we don't know what's going on for us, how can we know what we might need or want? And what I found was that, you know, when I got over most of the shame, I you know, the mindset I had was I would fire myself into speaking situations, even very ones I found very difficult, because I knew it was in there that I could learn, and that's where I needed to actually really make the changes. You know, but I'm not advocating that we just, you know, we try and you know, talk on television or something that would be really difficult, because really we need to start this work in the areas of our lives where stigma has least influence. So it could be with people we know well, it could be with family members, or perhaps not, it could be in therapy. The other thing about this is it's actually throwing stigma back in its own face. So if I voluntary stammer, if I stammer openly, if I'm trying to strip back the secondary behaviors, so I'm stammering. I remember, you know, when I began to do this, I would be stammering quite severely, blocking, but I would be looking the person straight in the eye. I wouldn't be, my body would be relatively relaxed. And what some people started saying to me is, you're pulling my leg, aren't you? Because the way I looked didn't match for them how I was speaking, because I was so relaxed about it. And that way I knew I was starting to make a bit of progress. So it's about throwing it back in the face of stigma. I'm stammering away, happily stammering in your face, you know. So you want me to, the stigma is telling me we want you to not stammer. It makes it more difficult for you. Ha ha ha, now we have power over you. We can label you, stereotype you, and so on. And I'm throwing it back in its face and say, look, I can, you know, I can stammer. You know, you want to hear me stammer? Well, here we go. Here's me stammering. So I suppose my preference then is to work directly with stammering. So I suppose the Free to Stutter program, and in a forum like this, I finally met people who talked openly about stammering, which is something I never did before. One of the components of the program, again, was narrative therapy, which I become very interested in. And that's the story we tell ourselves about who we are. But it's also the story that the world tells us, either explicitly or implicitly, about who we are and the nature of our relationships. One of the big questions then in that program was, so stammering has you feeling and thinking like this about yourself, and it has, you know, it's not the stammering, it's the stigma, because that's where it comes from. The stigma has you feeling, because the stammering in itself isn't a bad thing. So the stigma has you feeling, you know, negative ideas or thoughts about yourself. It has other people thinking negatively maybe about you as well. It has you thinking that your life opportunities are diminished and so on. Maybe you shouldn't get married, maybe you shouldn't have children, maybe you shouldn't have a job as a receptionist like I spoke about, and so on. So this is like a stigmatized identity. So in that program when I started, this is why I think community is so important. I lost in that week, and it makes me a bit kind of emotional to think about it, I lost almost 50 years of shame about the stigmatized or that spoiled identity that I had swallowed down from the world that wasn't anything to do with me. So I began to untangle myself from that negative stigmatized identity and begin to work out who I really was. One of the kind of challenges put to us, I know Sheen and others will talk about this, is to begin to live your life, stammer and all, as if you were a really good communicator. So you're not allowing it to stop you moving forward. I suppose, you know, one of the key things for me was being able to, because I had practiced some self-awareness before I went on that program, and now it was to put myself in speaking situations, the easy ones and the difficult ones, but standing back and observing what was going on in my mind, my emotions, my thoughts, my impulses, and then also I could work out which were the secondary behaviors. And you know, and they are again all, I would blame stigma on those for us trying to mask the fact that we stammer. So I started to strip back those and get to the pure stammer. So really, but that was difficult, and I don't believe I would have been able to do that without the support of other people who stammer community. And I you know, personally I believe I needed to go. I just did some personal therapy around it as well, because it was very painful for me to go back through and remember some of those really difficult experiences I had as a child, which, you know, as Mary is saying, that's not so prevalent anymore, which is great. So maybe I've talked about self-awareness. So maybe, how about this? How about if I stop for a moment? What would it be like if we do a short self-awareness exercise? So I can give you a little experience of what I'm talking about. Would you be up for doing that?
How are people
Yeah.
time-wise? I guess I know it's like,
Oh, yes, it's 30 minutes.
we're not quite, like, I think we started about +4, was it? So I suppose we have a few minutes.
Yeah.
But maybe people are rushing off. What do people think?
Well, it'll be very quick.
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
quick. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you now just to notice now how you're sitting. So supposing I want to personify calm and confidence. So I'm going to ask you, you might need to, because every thought, every emotion, every impulse lands in us physically. So I'm going to ask you to think about if you were going to sit in a way or stand in a way that personifies calm and confidence, what would you change how you're sitting? You know, so for me, I probably sit back with my head up a little bit. I breathe through my nose. So it's about just bring your attention to your physical body. Just do a really brief body scan, starting with your feet, up through your legs, up to noticing the contact you're making with the chair, checking out your lower back, your neck. Maybe that's an area where we hold on to tension or pressure. And we're not trying to change or fix, just notice any sensations that are there. Maybe how's your jaw? Are you clenching your jaw? I recently got what you call it, like a mouth, a gum shield, because I was clenching my teeth. Especially, I'm trying to learn the button accordion, and I was doing this when I was trying to concentrate. So just notice that, and maybe allow that to relax. And then now let's turn our attention to our emotions. So maybe take a moment to notice what you're feeling right now. Are you feeling happy, sad, excited, bored? Just naming and noticing and naming. Simple as that. And now turning your attention to thoughts. So almost observing the never-ending flow of thoughts and mental images in your mind, almost as if you're observing it in somebody else. So for me, it's some calm, some excitement, some anxiety about the time, and then an impulse to get caught up in that anxiety about the time, but letting it go. So I'm just noticing, observing, and then any impulses I might have. So Assagioli was a contemporary of Freud. He talked about this idea of self-awareness and the idea that what happens outside of my awareness will dominate me. But what happens inside my awareness, I can begin to have mastery over, and I can begin to have choice. And that's why I think when we're thinking about stigma, it's very insidious and sneaky, and it just gets inside us without us noticing. So the idea of this self-awareness is to switch on that self-awareness so I can notice what is going on for me. And then at least I've got some choice as to what I might be able to do about it. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Okay, so I know I'm going to speed myself up here. Okay, I'm just going to go to my next slide here. So Mary, were you going to talk about love? And then the next thing I'm going to talk about then is personal power.
I had moved it on. Sorry, James. I think I got your slides wrong.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I just wanted to. I will be very quick on this. I suppose whenever I talk about stuttering, I seem to involve the word love. And I know Stephen, or sorry, not Stephen, but Vince had to leave, which was a pity in the sense that I know we've ran over time. I just can't get out of the slideshow. Sorry, I was just trying to get out of it and it's not working. Okay. So just very quickly, and the reason I reference Vince is because that idea of pride and the difficulty that can be there for some people. I really do believe that idea that stammering has something to offer the world and to be celebrated, and it brings a lot of positive things with it. And I love this. There's a reference at the start, I think, in the bio, written about stuttering and what has love got to do with it. And I just want to kind of just focus, I suppose, that again, going back to vulnerability, and I'm not going to say too much, I'm going to leave this word with Constantino. It's Chris Constantino, who has kind of talked about stuttering as an act of love. And he proposes that by stuttering openly and sincerely, we share more of ourselves with others and therefore enter a deeper communion than would be possible if we hid our disfluencies. Now, he's obviously talking as a person who stammers. Stuttering introduces vulnerability into our conversations that would be absent had we been fluent. This vulnerability, when reciprocated, allows for intimacy. Research demonstrates that our stuttering impacts us less negatively when we are more open and speak with more spontaneity. By embracing our stutters, we are not only lessening the negative impact of stuttering, but we're also increasing our ability to know and therefore love each other. And I just think that means there's so much to be proud of in terms of stuttering. And I do think that when people can be open about their stuttering, that they do invite a vulnerability and an intimacy in their interactions with people. That's all I wanted to say. So James, I'll move it on to personal power and let you have the last word there on that one. You okay with that, James?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, just when you think about pride, what I think about is, and a parent being proud of their child. So the influence of, I'm trying to find my own notes here. The influence of stigma, it's really severe and really debilitating. But when a child has the courage to openly stammer and not engage in those secondary behaviors, that, like, people maybe don't understand how hard that is. But I would be very proud of them. When my child does something like that, I'm very proud of them. When they do something that's very difficult, so I think that's definitely something to celebrate. I'm going to be very quick here, but some of these ideas, I suppose they might be a little controversial. But sometimes I think that the insidiousness of stigma, even for us who are aware and working on our speech, I think sometimes, for me anyway, I speak about myself, sometimes I think that when I think I'm openly stammering, I'm actually openly engaging in secondary behaviors. And I'm not really allowing myself to let those go and just allow myself to speak openly, no matter what it might sound like. I listened to a recording of myself. I was speaking at a conference about a year ago, and when I found it and looked at it, and I just noticed I was using some secondary behaviors, to try and, I was under time pressure and all the rest of it. So that's just a question that I have for myself, and maybe that might help other people as well. So I'm going to talk very quickly about neuroscience. So I think Jessica might be interested in this. Particularly, I talked about 7.5 lessons about the brain. But like, for example, so children, their brains are designed to pick up language and culture and social cues like that, much more so than an adult. They have more of those parts of the brain to learn those things that an adult has. And that's why children can learn languages, maybe several. My own grandchild can learn, she's learning 3 languages at the same time and making a good fist of them. But the good news for us adults is that we can grow different parts of the brain when we use them. Because if we don't use them, they talk about, tuning and pruning. If we don't use parts of the brain, they get pruned, but we can grow them and we can adapt. So it's really important. It was really important for evolution, an evolutionary perspective, that little sea creatures were able to adapt, but even more so to be able to predict what's going to happen next. So that one of the things that we do naturally is we predict what's going to happen next. Sometimes those predictions are accurate and sometimes they're not. So for example, we learn how to drive a car, so we learn how to predict, anticipate what might be going to happen, and we can respond appropriately, sometimes even automatically. But then sometimes our predictions are right and sometimes they're not. So it's important. The thing about self-awareness is we just need to be noticing what are we predicting and what are we expecting. And then at least we've got a choice as to how we might respond to that. So our brains regulate our internal processes in an unconscious way, including our heart rate, breathing, balance of salt, sugar, and so on. And our brains connect with other brains, mainly outside of our awareness. But research is suggesting that we have a much greater impact on another person's body and affect than we've taken responsibility for. Measurable changes and regulation or dysregulation in one person's body often prompt changes in another person's. For example, if when we meet people, we talk with people, even if we're not romantically involved, strangers that we might meet for the first time in a support group, whatever it might be, what happens is that all of the people in that room, their bodies start to synchronize, their breathing, their heart rates begin to synchronize. They call this it happens between children and caregivers, between therapists and their clients, in a yoga class and in the stammering support group. So so we often mirror other people's movements in a dance that neither of us are aware of. So you might find yourself, both of you, with the hand here and then sitting back and so on. But what I found most interesting when I read the book was that the parts of the brain that we use for producing and understanding speech and language are the same parts that our bodies use to regulate our internal processes, including all of our major organs. So I think really important to be self-aware. And your brain it's not just in your head, it goes down into your guts as well. So you do have gut feelings. So words and how we understand and what we have going on in our minds has an immediate impact on what goes on in our physical body. So, for example, words words are written thousands of years ago, say from the Quran, the Bible, poetry, songs, whatever, can have an immediate impact on us. If I get a text from somebody thousands of miles away, just thinking about how much I love you, that'll have one impact. However, in the middle of the night, if I get a text from a strange number asking me, is your door locked, that'll have a completely different impact on me. But every thought, emotion, prediction lands on us physically. That's why I think self-awareness is a really important thing. Even, if you're talking to somebody and they raise their eyebrow, that can have an instant impact. So I think, this is the idea of noticing what I'm thinking, feeling. I'm trying to untangle myself from the impact of stigma. I think that's an act of self-respect and self-love. I suppose the final thing I suppose in my last job, I did loads of public speaking, sometimes with hundreds of people. And sometimes when I was walking down the lecture hall to go up to the lectern, the younger James would be screaming at me, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They're going to exploit you, they're going to see you're vulnerable, all of those things. But I've learned just to turn around, metaphorically, and hold that young James's hand and let him know that it's okay, that we've got this, and so on. So I think we're kind of out of time now. So that's really what I want to say. And thanks for listening. And thanks, Mary and Stephen, for inviting me.
Just in case. So, Stephen, I don't know if we've time for any questions or anything. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, look, I actually think we can actually just make time just for a few questions because it was such a great presentation. I just saw Jessica just had a hand up there, actually. So, Jessica, would you like to ask a question?
Oh, it was actually just a clapping emoji.
Oh, okay.
It was a really great presentation and really insightful, and it was even hard to listen at sometimes because I was thinking so much, very thought-provoking. So thanks so much for that.
Brilliant, Jessica. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. So it maybe it worked. So at least.
Yeah, so can I ask anyone else? Does anyone have any observations or questions? Anyone? Sorry, Jeff, if you want to just take just you're on mute there, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just for both of you, when you speak of the importance of opens as stammering, no, it's enormously important. But my difficulty with open stammering is that the tension seems to kick in kind of automatically, and I can feel guilty that I'm tense or that I'm trying too hard, and I think then that it isn't open stammering, and I feel guilty about that. If I have tension, I say, "Oh, like I've made a bags of that sentence, that whatever." So my big difficulty is open stammering. That I'm okay to a certain extent on voluntary stammering. I'm not overly sensitive with that. But the stammering, I still, because of the amount of tension that's there, I still have kind of serious problems in continuing to stammer openingly, which is something that you're brilliant at, Stephen, I must say. And I admire you for it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah. Well, even actually, Jeff, just to say, even that tension would have been there even for me at the start. So when I was starting to openly stammer, I could feel that my body was trying to pull me back, like, you know. So, but it just I suppose the big difference for me was just being able to openly stammer in a safe environment first. So whether it be with my wife or just be with my close friends, and then just be able to kind of broaden it out then anyways. But I think that you do have to go through that stage of letting your stammer just sound ugly, because like it's about giving up trying to hold the reins of it. So
Yeah,
letting go. So it is going to be tense at the same time.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen.
And if can I comment there, Stephen, as well, if that's okay? Just if you know, sometimes when I'm working with somebody, and a client doesn't have to be with stammering, anything, I could say to them, this could be the hardest work you will ever do. And for me, it was the hardest work I ever did, was just to, like you said, Stephen, just allow the stammer to sound like whatever it was going to sound like, without me trying to stop it or hold the reins. And I do think, and that's why I think I did loads of work on voluntary stammering as well. And even though sometimes those voluntary repetitions would turn into real stammering, but then it was about still holding on to myself, holding on to that self-awareness, still stepping back, and just, but without the guilt, which is a big thing. It's huge, because that's the stigma is so powerful, and that's how it works, is with shame. It's about discrimination and stereotyping, labeling, and it's about diminishing somebody's power. It's very sneaky and insidious.
And it is about being vulnerable. And I think maybe rather than feeling guilty about how you're doing, maybe feeling proud of how vulnerable you're allowing yourself to be, because it's huge vulnerability in that, like, you know, when you say it's the real hard work. And I think in a way that's a fabulous role model for everybody that you come in contact with, that you're willing to allow yourself, you know, to be that vulnerable, is a gift to other people and to yourself. But I understand, Jeff, how exactly, I don't stammer, but I understand maybe similar experiences for myself, how that constant judgy voice, you know, there's no escaping sometimes from it. But I'm just wondering, is there an option there of saying, wow, I'm taking a huge step here. I'm really putting myself out there and I deserve major credit for this. That's it.
Thanks, Mary.
Okay.
And Jeff, it's just to say as well, I always find I wouldn't notice how you stammer. I think anything like as much as you do, because what you say is it's honest and insightful and intelligent, all of those things. And I expect that's how other people might experience you as well, but sometimes that's not how we see ourselves, and that's hard.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, I think that's maybe a nice way to end, because like even just being able to be kind to yourself as well, and because and to just see the qualities that you really kind of do have then as well. Like, so I would like to just take this opportunity to just thank everyone for kind of sharing this space with us, and to kind of especially thank Mary and James just for an excellent presentation. This will be available up on the resource page of the Irish Stammering Association. So yeah, so just everyone, just give yourselves a round of applause. So yeah, well done.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
So I'll just stop recording.